The strike didn't sound like a blow. It sounded like a wet snap, a sharp percussion that echoed off the linoleum floors and the stainless steel tray of unused instruments. Zenzali's head lurched to the side, the world spinning into a blur of fluorescent lights and dizzying nausea. The copper taste of blood bloomed instantly against her inner cheek. For a heartbeat, the agonizing rhythm of the contractions, the heavy pulling tide of her 38-week pregnancy, was eclipsed by a white-hot flash of pure, unadulterated shock. She didn't scream. Her lungs felt like they had been collapsed by the weight of the betrayal. She slowly turned her face back toward the woman standing over her. Nurse Audrey wasn't trembling. She wasn't horrified by what she'd done. She was adjusting her spectacles, her eyes narrowed with a cold, clinical loathing. "I told you to be silent," Audrey hissed, her voice a jagged whisper. "You people always think the world stops because you're in pain. You are a Medicaid burden, Zenzali. Do not test my patience again. Before we reveal how the dragon dismantles this bully, comment your location below so we know where our global family is watching from. If you aren't subscribed to my Afro-Korean boss stories yet, are you waiting for Nurse Audrey to come for you next? Subscribe now or tell us in the comments exactly why you're choosing to miss out on the justice Zenzali deserves." Zenzali gripped the cold metal guardrails of the bed, her knuckles turning a ghostly white against her deep mahogany skin. The monitor beside her bed hissed and groaned, the green lines of her vitals spiking in a frantic, jagged dance. I can't breathe," Zenzali wheezed. The pain in her abdomen wasn't the dull ache of Braxton Hicks anymore. It was a sharp, tearing sensation, as if a serrated blade was being drawn across her insides. "Something is wrong, please. The doctor." "The doctor is busy with patients who actually have insurance," Audrey snapped, turning her back to check a clipboard. She didn't see Zenzali's hand trembling as it hovered over the call button. Audrey reached out and swiped the remote off the bed, letting it clatter to the floor, out of reach. "You'll wait until I decide you're ready, and you'll do it quietly." The sterile scent of bleach suddenly felt like a suffocating shroud. Zenzali looked up at the clock on the wall. The red second hand ticked with agonizing precision. 11:14 p.m. She closed her eyes, a single tear carving a path through the sweat and the dust of the ward. She thought of Ji Hoon. She thought of the man the world saw as a quiet logistics manager in a sharp charcoal suit, the man who bowed politely to neighbors and spoke in soft, melodic tones. She knew where he was. He was in a glass-walled boardroom in the West Loop, ending a contract dispute. Audrey walked toward the door, her sensible shoes squeaking with a rhythmic, mocking sound. "I'll be back in an hour. If I hear so much as a whimper, I'll have you move to the hallway. Let's see how your high-risk status handles the draft." The heavy double doors of the ward didn't just open. They swung back with a force that suggested the air pressure in the hallway had suddenly, violently changed. The silence that followed was heavy, like the moments before a lightning strike. Ji Hoon didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked with a rhythmic, predatory grace that made the air in the room feel 20 degrees colder. He was flanked by Kwang-soon and Dae-hyun, two men whose overcoats were buttoned tight and whose expressions were as unreadable as granite. Ji Hoon's eyes locked onto Zenzali. He saw the way she was slumped. He saw the red, angry welt blooming on her left cheek. He saw the blood on her lip. Audrey spun around, her face twisting into a mask of professional indignation. "Sir, you can't be in here. Visiting hours ended at—" Ji Hoon ignored her. He reached the bedside in 3 long strides. He leaned down, his movements fluid and soft, and pressed a kiss to Zenzali's sweat-drenched forehead. His hand, warm and steady, cupped her bruised cheek. "Kutnasyo," he whispered in Korean, his voice a low, vibrating silk. "It is over." He turned his head slowly toward Audrey. He didn't look angry. Anger was a human emotion, and in this moment Ji Hoon looked like something ancient and elemental. His eyes were dark, empty voids. "You put your hands on my wife," Ji Hoon said. It wasn't a question. It was a recorded fact. "She was being combative," Audrey stuttered, her bravado beginning to leak out of her like air from a punctured tire. She looked at the two men standing at the door, their hands folded neatly, their shadows stretching long across the floor. I will call security. You people can't just barge in here." Ji Hoon took a single step toward her. He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his presence seemed to pin Audrey against the medication cart. "I am security," Ji Hoon replied. Behind him, Kwang Soon flipped open a high-end laptop on the rolling hospital tray, his fingers flying across the keys with the mechanical rhythm of a soldier. "Audrey Vance," Ji Hoon began, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Born in 1968, 4 malpractice settlements, all involving black and brown mothers, all buried by your brother-in-law, Dr. Sterling." Audrey's breath hitched. How do you have that? Those are private records." "I don't believe in privacy for those who hide behind masks," Ji Hoon said. He reached out, his gloved hand plucking the name tag from Audrey's chest. He looked at it for a moment before dropping it onto the floor. "I came here to celebrate a birth. But for you, Audrey, I think tonight is a funeral." The silence in the room was no longer the silence of a hospital. It was the silence of a tomb. Audrey leaned against the cold metal of the medication cart, her breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. She looked at Ji Hoon, then at the man with the laptop, Kwang Soon, whose face remained as impassive as a statue. "You think you're special?" Audrey spat, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You're just another thug in an expensive suit. This is a medical institution. You can't just walk in here and demand things. My brother-in-law is the chief of medicine. One phone call and you'll be in a holding cell." Ji Hoon didn't flinch. He leaned over Zenzali, checking the IV line with a gentleness that stood in jarring contrast to the aura of death he projected toward the nurse. "Kwang Soon," he said softly. "The phone call." "Already intercepted, boss," Kwang Soon replied, his fingers dancing across the keys. "Dr. Sterling attempted to call the first precinct 3 minutes ago. I redirected his line to our private switchboard. He's currently speaking to an automated loop of his own voice." Audrey's jaw dropped. That's impossible. You can't hack the hospital's landlines." "I didn't hack them, Audrey," Ji Hoon said, finally turning his full attention back to her. "Last quarter, an anonymous holding company, Mirene Logistics, purchased the third-party firm that manages St. Jude's digital infrastructure. I don't need to break into this hospital. I own the air it breathes." He gestured to the laptop screen, which Kwang Soon rotated so Audrey could see. Her eyes darted across the rows of data. It wasn't just her personnel file. It was a digital map of her life. 2018, Ji Hoon began, his voice a low, melodic drone. "A young woman named Maria Santos complained of abdominal pain post-op. You ignored her. You told the shift lead she was seeking narcotics. She died of internal hemorrhaging 3 hours later. Settlement. $2 million paid out of the hospital's risk management fund, signed off by Dr. Sterling." "That was a clinical error," Audrey shrieked. 2020, Ji Hoon continued, ignoring her. "Aisha Robinson. You refused her an epidural because you claimed her pain tolerance should be higher. Based on her physique, she suffered a nervous system shock. Another settlement, another signature from Sterling." Zenzali let out a low moan of pain, and Ji Hoon's expression darkened. The empty voids of his eyes suddenly sparked with a dormant, predatory fire. He reached out and touched the red welt on Zenzali's cheek again. "You see, Audrey, men like me deal in logistics. We understand that everything has a price, and every action has a destination. You thought your destination was a pension and a comfortable retirement. You were wrong." Kwang Soon tapped a final key. "Uploading now, boss." "What are you doing?" Audrey gasped, moving toward the laptop. Dae-hyun, the second silent enforcer, moved half an inch, his presence alone stopping her in her tracks like a brick wall. "I am erasing you," Ji Hoon said. "In 30 seconds, your nursing license will be flagged as revoked in the National Practitioner Databank. Your access to the hospital's medication dispensers has already been terminated. And those settlements? They are no longer private. I've released the unredacted files to the Chicago Tribune and the state prosecutor's office." Audrey felt the floor tilt beneath her. The institutional power she had used as a shield for 20 years was evaporating in real time. She wasn't a nurse anymore. She wasn't a protected relative of the chief. She was a liability. "You can't do this," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears of rage. "You're a criminal. You're a monster." "I am a husband," Ji Hoon corrected her, "and you are an annoyance that has been dealt with. But we aren't finished. I promised Zenzali a safe delivery, and this hospital is currently unsafe." He looked at the clock. It was 11:35 p.m. "Dae-hyun, bring the board. I want the chief, the director, and the primary donors here in 10 minutes. Tell them if they aren't in this ward by 11:45, I start selling the hospital's debt to the highest bidder on the dark web." Zenzali reached out, her hand finding Ji Hoon's. He squeezed it, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Rest, my heart," he whispered. "The world is changing for you." Audrey collapsed into a plastic chair, her face buried in her hands. The silent dragon hadn't even raised his hand, yet he had destroyed her more thoroughly than any blow could. He had taken her past, her present, and her future, and ground them into the sterile dust of the ward. But the contractions were getting closer. The monitor's beep was becoming more frantic. The systematic takedown was moving from the individual to the institution. The heavy double doors of the maternity ward didn't just open. They were held open with the terrifying precision of a military operation. Ji Hoon didn't look up from Zenzali's side. He continued to stroke her hair, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, staying far enough from the bruise to avoid causing pain, but close enough to let her feel his heat. The air in the room didn't just cool, it solidified. Behind Ji Hoon, Kwang-soon and Dae-hyun stood like twin pillars of smoke, their presence turning the sterile hospital room into a throne room. When the board arrived, they didn't enter with the swagger of administrative power. They entered with the frantic, stumbling gait of people who had just realized the floor beneath them was made of glass, and it was cracking. At the front was Dr. Sterling, the chief of medicine. His silk tie was crooked and sweat beaded on his upper lip. Behind him was Mrs. Montgomery, the hospital's most prominent donor, draped in a coat that cost more than the average nurse's annual salary. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling blustered, though his voice cracked at the end. He looked at Audrey, who was still huddled in the plastic chair like a discarded rag. "Audrey, why aren't you on your shift? And who are these people?" Ji Hoon turned slowly. He didn't stand up. He didn't need to. The high-status shift was so absolute that Sterling actually took a step back, his hand fluttering to his chest. "My name is Ji Hoon," he said, his voice a low, melodic silk that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of Sterling's bones. "And you are the man who signed the checks that silenced the families of dead mothers." I don't know what you're talking about," Sterling stammered. "Sit," Ji Hoon commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Dae-hyun moved. With a grace that was almost too fast to follow, he kicked 2 chairs forward. The sound of the metal legs screeching against the linoleum was like a gunshot. Sterling and Mrs. Montgomery sat. "You see her?" Ji Hoon gestured to Zenzali. "This is my wife. She is the light of my life, the mother of my son. And 10 minutes ago, your relative, the woman you protected, struck her. Not because of a medical necessity, but because she felt she had the power to do so." "It was an incident," Audrey cried out from the corner. "She was being combative." Ji Hoon's eyes didn't even move toward Audrey. He kept them locked on Sterling. The word combative is the favorite shield of the incompetent doctor. It is the word you use when you want to justify your own failures of empathy. But here is the problem. You chose the wrong victim. Mrs. Montgomery cleared her throat, her voice trembling but sharp. Listen, Mr. Ji Hoon, or whoever you are, this is a highly unfortunate misunderstanding. We are prepared to offer your wife a private suite, a full refund of all medical expenses, and a generous settlement. We can handle this quietly. There's no need for— You think I want your money? Ji Hoon interrupted. He gave a soft, chilling laugh. Mrs. Montgomery, let's talk about your money. Your foundation, the Montgomery Light, receives 60% of its funding from a logistics conglomerate based in Busan, a conglomerate that handles the distribution of medical supplies across the Midwest. Mrs. Montgomery's face went ash gray. The Choi Group? I am the Choi Group, Ji Hoon said. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Montgomery looked as though she might faint. She realized in that moment that the man sitting in a maternity ward in a wrinkled shirt was the person who held the leash to her entire social and philanthropic identity. I didn't come here to be bought, Ji Hoon continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I came here to show you what happens when you build a house on top of a dragon's nest. You thought my wife was a number. You thought she was someone you could hit and hide. But Zenzali is the queen of my world, and you are just insects who forgot to fear the sun. Zenzali let out a sharp gasp, her body tensing as another contraction, stronger than the last, racked her frame. Ji Hoon's hand tightened on hers. The terrifying calm broke for a fraction of a second, replaced by a raw, protective desperation. The doctor, Ji Hoon ordered, his eyes flashing at Sterling. A real doctor, not a politician, not a relative. If my wife or my child suffers one more second of discomfort because of your incompetence, I won't just fire you, Sterling. I will dismantle this building brick by brick while you are still inside it. Sterling scrambled to his feet, fumbling for his pager. I'll get the head of obstetrics. Immediately. One more thing, Ji Hoon said as Sterling reached the door. Audrey is finished. If I see her in this ward or any ward ever again, my men will stop being polite. Do you understand? Sterling nodded frantically and fled. Ji Hoon turned back to Zenzali, his face softening instantly. The predator was gone, replaced by the husband. Breathe, my love, he whispered. The world is watching, and they are finally learning your name. The digital heart of St. E. Jude's Medical Center began to beat to a new, ruthless rhythm. In the sterile quiet of the maternity ward, the paper trail Ji Hoon had promised began to manifest as a public execution of reputation. Boss, Kwang Sun murmured, his face illuminated by the cool blue glow of 3 different windows on his screen. The internal bypass is complete. I have full administrative override of the hospital's IPTV system and the public PA. Every screen from the lobby to the cafeteria is ours. Ji Hoon didn't look up. He was busy wiping a cool cloth across Zenzali's forehead. Do it. Let them see the rot they've been hiding. Across the hospital, the shift in reality was instantaneous. In the crowded waiting room on the first floor, a family watching a muted news broadcast saw the screen flicker to black. In the doctor's lounge, a group of residents eating late-night takeout stared as their monitors hissed with static. Then, the image stabilized. It was grainy, high-angle security footage from the room they were currently standing in. There was no sound at first, but the visual was unmistakable. The entire hospital saw Zenzali, vulnerable, sweating, gasping for air. They saw Nurse Audrey enter, not with a tray of medicine, but with a sneer that transcended the digital artifacts of the recording. Then came the moment that froze the blood of every employee in the building. Audrey leaned over, her face a mask of malice, and her hand flew out. The slap was silent on the screens, but the physical impact, the way Zenzali's head snapped back, the way her hand flew to her face, was deafening in its clarity. "What is this?" Sterling gasped, clutching his chest as he stared at the wall-mounted monitor in the hallway. "Turn it off! Someone turn it off!" "You can't!" Ji Hoon's voice drifted out from the room, calm and chilling. "My team has encrypted the broadcast with a 56-bit rotating key. By the time your IT department even finds the source, the entire city of Chicago will have downloaded the clip. This is the moment of truth. Justice is being served in high definition. If you're enjoying seeing this bully exposed, subscribe to my Afro-Korean boss stories right now. Don't be like Dr. Sterling trying to hide the truth. If you aren't subscribing, tell us in the comments. Are you on the side of the abuser, or are you just waiting for your own dragon to save you? The screens didn't stop with the video. A second later, a scroll of text began to run across the bottom of every monitor in the building. It was a list: names, dates, amounts. 2018 patient Maria Santos, malpractice settlement $2.0. Lead nurse Audrey Vance, approved by Dr. Sterling. 2020 patient Aisha Robinson, settlement $1.8. Lead nurse Audrey Vance, approved by Dr. Sterling. The list went on, a digital ledger of institutional racism and covered-up cruelty. The professional destruction was no longer a threat. It was a reality. In the lobby, people began to pull out their phones, recording the screens, their whispers growing into a roar of indignation. Ji Hoon stood up, smoothing the front of his charcoal suit. He walked toward Audrey, who was staring at the screen in her own room, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of career suicide. "The social exposure is the most painful part, isn't it, Audrey?" Ji Hoon asked, his voice almost gentle, "knowing that every person you've ever looked down upon now knows exactly who you are. You aren't a nurse. You are a predator in a white coat, and the world finally sees the teeth." You've ruined me," she whispered, her eyes glazed. "No," Ji Hoon corrected her. "You ruined yourself the moment you thought your status gave you the right to hurt my wife. I am simply the one who turned on the lights." Kwang Soon tapped another command. "The footage is live on the Tribune's tip line and trending on 3 social platforms, boss. The hashtags are already being tracked." Ji Hoon turned back to the door. "Dae-hyun, the board is getting restless. Bring the lawyers in. Not the hospital's lawyers, ours." Just as he spoke, the elevator chimes echoed through the ward, a sound that usually signaled the arrival of flowers or family. But as the door slid open, it wasn't a florist who stepped out. It was a phalanx of men and women in suits so sharp they looked like they could draw blood. At the head of the group was a tall, imposing black man with silvering hair and eyes that held the weight of 1,000 courtrooms. He didn't look at the security guards. He didn't look at the panicked nurses. He looked straight at Ji Hoon and gave a single sharp nod. "My son-in-law," the man boomed, his voice filling the corridor with the authority of a titan. "I see you've handled the digital side of things. Shall I handle the rest?" Ji Hoon stepped aside, a small, respectful bow inclining his head. "The stage is yours, Mr. Jordan." The Afro-Korean alliance had arrived. The systematic takedown was about to move from the shadows of the internet to the searing light of the legal system. The maternity ward, usually a place of hushed whispers and soft lullabies, had been transformed into a theater of war. The arrival of the Jordan legal team shifted the energy from a tactical ambush to an institutional siege. Justice Jordan, Zenzali's father, walked with the measured, heavy tread of a man who had spent 40 years breaking the wills of corrupt men in the highest courts of Illinois. Behind him, 4 junior partners carried leather briefcases that looked like weapons of war. They didn't stop at the nurses' station. They bypassed the flustered security guards as if they were invisible. Justice Jordan stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the chaos. The the pale, trembling Dr. Sterling, the shell-shocked Mrs. Emin Montgomery, and finally, his daughter, Zenzali. His face softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at her. Then it hardened into a mask of granite as he turned to the board. "My son-in-law handles the shadows," Justice Jordan remarked, nodding to Ji Hoon, who stood with his arms crossed, a dark sentinel at the foot of the bed. "I handle the light. Between the two, there is nowhere for you to hide." Dr. Sterling tried to regain some semblance of authority. "Mr. Jordan, we recognize your reputation, but this is a private medical facility. You cannot simply—" "I am not Mr. Jordan to you, doctor," the older man interrupted, his voice a rolling thunder that seemed to rattle the glass partitions. "I am the lead counsel for the Jordan Group, and as of 5 minutes ago, I am the legal representative for 14 other families who suffered under the care of Nurse Audrey Vance and this institution. We've been building a class action dossier for months. We were waiting for a catalyst. You," he pointed a long, accusing finger at Sterling, "provided it tonight." Ji Hoon stepped forward, his eyes locked on Mrs. Montgomery. "The hospital is currently attempting to delete the internal logs of the last hour. Kwang Soon?" "Blocked, boss," Kwang Soon replied from the corner, his fingers still a blur on the laptop. "I've mirrored the hospital's primary server to a cloud-based offshore account. Every time they try to hit delete, a copy is sent directly to the district attorney's office. The realization hit the board members like a physical blow. They weren't just facing a lawsuit, they were facing a total takeover." "We want a settlement," Mrs. Montgomery whispered, her voice cracking. "Whatever you want. 10 million, 20? We can set up a foundation in Zenzali's name. Just stop the broadcast. Stop the lawyers." Justice Jordan let out a sharp, mirthless laugh. "You still don't understand. We aren't here to negotiate the price of my daughter's dignity. We are here to negotiate the terms of your surrender." He signaled to one of his partners, who produced a thick document from a briefcase and slammed it onto the rolling hospital tray. "This," Jordan continued, "is an emergency injunction. We are freezing all hospital assets pending an independent audit of your mortality rates for minority patients. Furthermore, we are filing for the immediate removal of the chief of medicine and the head of nursing. If you refuse to sign these voluntary resignations, my son-in-law's logistics firm will begin calling in the hospital's outstanding construction loans. You'll be bankrupt by dawn." Ji Hoon leaned in, his face inches from Sterling's. "You thought Zenzali was alone because I wasn't here. You thought she was weak because she was in pain. You mistook her patience for helplessness." The Afro-Korean alliance was a terrifying symmetry of power. Ji Hoon's cold, calculated technological and financial strangulation was the anvil. The Jordan family's legal firebrand power was the hammer. And the hospital board was caught squarely in the middle. "Sign it," Mrs. Montgomery urged Sterling, her voice frantic. "Sterling, for God's sake, sign it before they take our homes too." Sterling's hand shook as he reached for the pen. As he scrawled his name, effectively ending his 30-year career in a matter of seconds, the room felt like the oxygen was being sucked out of it. Audrey, watching from the corner, began to wail, a thin, pathetic sound that no one in the room acknowledged. But just as the papers were gathered, the monitor connected to Zenzali's heart began to emit a long, flat, terrifying tone. "The baby!" Zenzali screamed, her body arching in a spasm of agony that made the previous contractions look like nothing. "Ji Hoon! Something is wrong. It's tearing me apart." The air of triumph vanished instantly. Ji Hoon was at her side in a heartbeat, his face pale, his composure finally cracking. "Doctor!" he roared, the sound echoing down the hall. "Now!" The legal battle was won, but the physical battle for the lives of his wife and child had just reached a deadly climax. The emergency lights in the hallway began to pulse red, signaling an emergency C-section. The abundance Ji Hoon had promised was suddenly eclipsed by the terrifying reality of scarcity, the scarcity of time. The swinging doors of the intensive care unit didn't just divide rooms, they divided worlds. As Zenzali was wheeled toward the operating theater, the air in the corridor seemed to vibrate with the sheer scale of the power now occupying it. The hospital staff, previously indifferent or overtly hostile, now moved with the frantic energy of people fleeing a forest fire. They had witnessed the digital execution of Nurse Audrey and the professional decapitation of Dr. Sterling. But now they faced the combined might of the city's two most formidable dynasties. Justice Jordan stood in the center of the hallway, his charcoal gray suit contrasting sharply with the white walls. He was a man of the light, a titan who used the law like a scalpel to remove the rot of the city. Ji Hoon, the silent dragon, stood 5 paces behind him, a man of the shadows who operated in the silences between heartbeats. Together, they formed a perimeter of absolute authority. "My daughter is in that room because of the environment you fostered," Justice Jordan said, his voice a low, resonant rumble directed at the cowering remaining board members. "Every minute she is under that knife, a new lawsuit is being drafted. Every drop of blood she loses will cost this hospital a floor of its building." Ji Hoon didn't speak to the board. He was looking at the double doors where Zenzali had disappeared. His hands were folded in front of him, but his knuckles were white. The terrifying calm he usually wore was beginning to fray at the edges, revealing the raw, jagged edges of a man who would burn the world to cinders if it meant keeping his wife's heart beating. "Kwang Soon," Ji Hoon said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm here, boss," the tech specialist replied, looking up from his persistent glow of screens. The socialite, "Mrs. Montgomery, I want her foundation's tax records from the last decade cross-referenced with the Busan shipping manifests. If she so much as thought about a kickback, I want it on the Attorney General's desk before the sun comes up." "Already on it. I've also found a series of offshore accounts linked to the hospital's equipment procurement fund. It looks like Sterling wasn't just covering up malpractice. He was skimming the settlements to pay for his yacht in Lake Michigan." Justice Jordan overheard this and turned slightly, a grim smile touching his lips. "Excellent. I'll handle the subpoenas for the bank records. It seems our interests are perfectly aligned. Ji Hoon." The Afro-Korean alliance was a sight that the Chicago elite would talk about in hushed tones for years. It was the meeting of tactical precision and social firebrand power. While Ji Hoon strangled the hospital's financial and digital throat, the Jordan family was dismantling its legal and moral standing. Dae-hyun approached from the elevators, his stride purposeful. He leaned into Ji Hoon's ear. "The police are downstairs, not the ones Sterling called. The real ones. Internal Affairs is with them. They're interested in the unexplained discrepancies in the narcotics locker." Ji Hoon nodded once. "And Audrey?" "She's being escorted to her locker now to gather her things," Dae-hyun said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She won't find what she expects." In the background, the hospital's PA system crackled. A frantic voice, the new acting director, began announcing emergency protocols. The hospital was being purged. The bias that had allowed Audrey to thrive was being incinerated by the sheer heat of the retribution. Justice Jordan walked over to Ji Hoon. For the first time, the two men looked at each other not as business associates or reluctant family, but as two fathers. "She is strong, Ji Hoon," Justice Jordan said softly. "The Jordan blood doesn't yield easily, and she has the dragon watching over her. She will make it." "She has to," Ji Hoon replied, his eyes never leaving the OR doors. "Because if she doesn't, there won't be enough of this city left for you to practice law in." The systematic takedown was nearly complete. The villains were in ruins. The institutional power had been seized and redirected. But as the pacing of the story slowed to a tense, agonizing crawl, the focus shifted from revenge back to the most basic human desire, the survival of the innocent. Audrey was seen being led through the lobby in handcuffs, her screams of, "This isn't fair," falling on the deaf ears of the very patients she had once ignored. Her career was gone. Her freedom was evaporating. Her legacy was a viral video of a slap that would follow her to her grave. But inside the OR, a different kind of drama was unfolding. A drama that would lead to a discovery that even Ji Hoon, with all his surveillance and shadows, hadn't seen coming. The air in the surgical waiting area was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy, metallic tang of an impending storm. Outside, the Chicago skyline was being devoured by thunderheads, but inside, the only sound was the rhythmic, haunting thud-thud of the automated scrubbers down the hall. The destruction mechanism had reached its final, most visceral stage. As Zenzali lay on the operating table, her life suspended between the clinical cold of the scalpel and the fierce heat of her own will, the villains were being systematically deleted from the board. Audrey Vance was no longer a name. She was a case file. Led through the sterile corridors by two plainclothes officers, she looked smaller than she had an hour ago. The institutional power she had wielded like a flail had been stripped away, leaving only a bitter, aging woman in a stained uniform. "You don't understand," Audrey shrieked as they reached the medication lockers. "I've given 20 years to this place. You're taking the word of a criminal over mine." "We aren't taking anyone's word, Audrey," the lead officer said, his voice flat. "We're taking the evidence." Dae-hyun stood by the locker, his hands in his pockets, his face a mask of bored indifference. As Audrey opened her locker to retrieve her purse, a small, clear plastic bag fell out. It hit the floor with a soft, incriminating thud. Inside were several vials of hospital-grade fentanyl and midazolam, narcotics that had been reported missing from the pharmacy weeks ago. Audrey stared at the floor, her eyes bulging. That's not mine. He put it there. That man." She pointed a shaking finger at Dae-hyun. Dae-hyun didn't even blink. "I've been standing in the hallway with 3 security cameras pointed at my head, nurse. Perhaps you should have spent less time hitting patients and more time counting your inventory." The click of the handcuffs was the final punctuation mark on her career. As she was led away, the professional and social destruction was complete. She was a pariah, a thief, and a bully, her face already plastered across every news feed in the Midwest, thanks to Kwang Soon's digital broadcast. Back at the OR doors, the emotional rhythm shifted from terror to a fragile, breathless hope. The red light above the door flickered, then turned a steady, calm green. The doors swung open. A surgeon emerged, his brow slick with sweat, his mask hanging loose around his neck. He looked at Ji Hoon, then at Justice Jordan. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "Mr. Ji Hoon," the doctor began, his voice trembling. "The baby, your son. He is healthy. He's a fighter. He's in the neonatal unit being stabilized, but his vitals are strong." Ji Hoon let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. The silent dragon leaned against the wall for a fraction of a second, the tension leaving his shoulders. "And Zenzali?" The doctor's face paled further. The afterglow of the birth was instantly choked by a new, darker shadow. "She is stable, for now. But we found something during the procedure. Something that explains why the labor was so violent, why her blood pressure wouldn't stabilize despite our best efforts." Ji Hoon straightened, his eyes narrowing into lethal slits. "Speak." "We ran a rapid talk screen when her heart rate spiked on the table," the doctor whispered, stepping closer so the remaining hospital staff couldn't hear. "She hasn't been suffering from natural complications. Someone has been microdosing her with a synthetic sedative, a derivative of a compound used in the Busan shipping yards to keep livestock calm during long transits. It's designed to be undetectable in standard prenatal screenings." The room went cold. Justice Jordan's hand gripped his cane so hard the wood groaned. The dosage was calculated, the doctor continued. It wasn't meant to kill her. It was meant to ensure the baby was born with developmental difficulties, to weaken the line, to make her a burden. Ji Hoon didn't explode. He didn't roar. He became a statue of ice. The plot twist had landed with the weight of a mountain. This wasn't the work of a bitter nurse or a corrupt chief of medicine. This was a surgical strike from within. Only someone with access to his home, his private meals, and his inner circle would know how to use a Busan-specific sedative. "Kwang-soon," Ji Hoon said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that signaled the start of a much larger, much bloodier war. "I'm already pulling the house security footage, boss," Kwang-soon replied, his face grim. "And the staff logs. Whoever did this, there's nowhere for them to hide." The systematic takedown of the hospital was over, but the true conflict had just been revealed. The dragon had cleared the forest, only to find the snake was already inside the cave. The private recovery suite on the top floor of St. Jude's was no longer a hospital room. It was a fortress. Ji Hoon had moved Zenzali there within the hour, guarded by a rotating shift of men whose loyalty was bought in blood and tempered in the docks of Busan. Outside the window, the Chicago rain lashed against the glass, reflecting the neon hum of a city that had no idea how close it had come to burning. Zenzali lay propped against a mountain of silk pillows, her son, wrapped in a soft cream-colored blanket, sleeping soundly in the crook of her arm. The abundance Ji Hoon had promised was visible in the fresh flowers, the private chefs, and the specialized medical team flown in from Seoul. But the air was heavy. The moral lesson of the night had been learned. Dignity is not given, it is defended. Ji Hoon stood by the window, his silhouette a sharp, dark line against the gray sky. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even loosened his tie. He was looking at a small, encrypted tablet in his hand. "He looks like you," Zenzali whispered, her voice tired but clear. "He has your eyes. I hope he doesn't inherit your ghosts." Ji Hoon turned, his expression softening as he looked at his wife and child. He walked to the bedside and knelt, pressing a kiss to Zenzali's palm. "He will inherit a world where no one dares to raise a hand to him. That is my only job now." "Justice," Zenzali said, using her father's name for a moment. "My father said the lawsuits were filed an hour ago. The hospital is being rebranded. The Montgomery Wing is being renamed after Maria Santos. He's happy, Ji Hoon. He feels like he's finally cleaning the city. Your father handles the light," Ji Hoon said, his voice dropping an octave. "But the light cannot reach the roots of the weeds, Zenzali." He handed her the tablet. On the screen was a grainy thermal image from their kitchen back in the West Loop, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. It showed a figure, shadowed and familiar, standing over the stove, carefully stirring a vial of clear liquid into Zenzali's evening tea. Zenzali's breath caught in her throat. "No, not him. He's been with your family since Busan. He's the one who taught you how to shoot. He's like a father to you." "Treachery doesn't care about history," Ji Hoon said, his voice a flat, dead thing. He didn't want a half-blood heir to the syndicate. He thought if he could weaken the child, the board in Korea would force me to step down and name him the successor. The plot twist was a cold blade in the heart of their domestic peace. The nurse, the doctor, the hospital, they were just the surface. The real rot was deep in the dragon's own nest. Ji Hoon stood up, his eyes flashing with a dormant fire that signaled the end of the afterglow and the start of a new, darker chapter. "I have to go. Kwang-soon has tracked his signal to a warehouse near the docks. He thinks he's safe because he knows my tactics." "Ji Hoon," Zenzali reached out, grabbing his sleeve. "Don't become the monster they think you are." "I am the monster that protects the angels," Ji Hoon replied. He leaned down and kissed her one last time, a lingering, silent goodbye. "Wait for me. When I return, the nest will be clean." As he walked out, the heavy double doors of the suite clicking shut behind him, the camera lingered on the sleeping baby. The child stirred, his tiny hand clenching into a fist, a mirror of his father's silent resolve. The resolution was a cliffhanger. The catharsis was only half complete. The war for St. Jude's was over, but the war for the dragon's soul had just begun. The dragon has found the traitor, and blood is about to be spilled on the Busan docks. Are you going to walk away now, or are you going to subscribe to my Afro-Korean boss stories to see the final brutal justice? If you're leaving us here, tell us in the comments, are you afraid of what the dragon will do next? Coming up next on the channel, the Busan Betrayal. We reveal the identity of the man who dared to poison Zenzali and the secret alliance between the Jordan's family and the Korean underworld that will change the face of Chicago forever. You won't believe which loyal friend is actually a double agent. Subscribe now and hit the bell. The hunt begins in 24 hours.